Thank you. All right, we are back. We're going to be talking about the rest of GI today. We started GI last week. The tapes and video lectures have been posted. There were two parts to that first lecture. This will be the grand finale, okay? Starting in the small intestines. So small intestines and its associates. The small intestines, don't forget, the three parts of the small intestines are duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. So we're going to be talking about those in general and separately, okay? Don't forget that tonicity, 20 feet in cadaver, about 10 feet in a live person because of tonicity. We talked about that last time, okay? The duodenum is retroperitoneal, our little mnemonic. The kidneys ascend and descend down the pike. Kidneys are retroperitoneal, ascending colon, descending colon. Duodenum or duodenum and pancreas, okay, are all retroperitoneal. Duodenum. The duodenum forms a C-shaped curve and the pancreas sits right into it. So when you have to identify the duodenum when we do the dissection in the cat, when you open up the abdominal cavity, look for the end or the pyloric region of the stomach. That pyloric region will then lead into the curve shape of the duodenum. Once you find that curve shape of the duodenum, you'll see the pancreas will sit right in that shape or C shape of the duodenum. That's a great way to identify the pancreatic tissue. If you pull apart those serous membranes where the pancreas is, you'll see it looks like a grainy kind of tissue. That's pancreas, and we'll show that to you in lab, okay? When we are looking at the duodenum will be the first area of the small intestines into which we'll release digestive enzymes, bicarbonate, and also bile, okay? So the digestive enzymes come from the pancreas. There's a duct that comes in from the pancreas. Actually, let me draw this for you. Okay. So if this is the C shape of the duodenum, make sure I'm on the right screen. Good. Okay. The pancreas has a duct, okay, that actually joins up with the common bile duct. Okay. They both go into the duodenum, and this is right into your notes, into the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Those are going to feed digestive enzymes from the pancreas, also bicarbonate from the pancreas, because if you think about this for a second, the chyme that's coming from the stomach is very acidic. The stomach will spit a little bit of that digested food or the beginning of that digested food into the duodenum. It's very acidic. The pancreas releases bicarbonate to calm down that acidity. Okay, so pancreas, digestive enzymes, bicarbonate. Common bile duct is going to come from the liver and the gallbladder. Okay, they will feed down bile. Bile will also go into this hepatopancreatic ampulla, which is the opening. And if you think about it, hepato, liver, pancreatic, pancreas, ampulla is an opening. Okay, so it's an opening where these ducts feed the substance into the duodenum to start that digestive process and calm down the acidity of the chyme that's feeding into the duodenum. Okay, so the sphincter of Oddi is going to be a little sphincter of smooth muscle, which will open and let those substances come in from the pancreas and the liver. Okay, so if we go back to we go back to that. There's an actual picture of it. You see the C shape of the duodenum. You can see the gallbladder. Okay, the gallbladder is going to lead to the cystic duct. The cystic duct will join into the common hepatic duct, or common bile duct, I'm sorry. Okay, and I'll explain to you that whole system in a little bit. Okay, feeds the bile down. Pancreas is going to feed digestive enzymes into the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Okay. All that's going to go into the duodenum. So a lot of the chemical breaking down or processing of foodstuffs is going to happen in the duodenum due to these substances feeding into it. Jejunum and ileum. Jejunum is about 8 feet, ileum is about 12 feet. Most absorption of nutrients will happen here. Okay. The mesentery, we talked about mesenteries, those serous membranes help to hold those structures in place. Ileocecal valve is going to be between the ileum and the first part of the ascending colon, which is actually the cecum. The ileocecal valve will prevent backflow from the ascending colon back to the ileum, keeps foodstuffs going in one direction, okay, ileum into the large intestines. Okay. Histology of the small intestines. So once again, if we're talking about wave-like presentations, okay, wave-like presentations, this is increasing surface area. So don't forget, the majority of macronutrients, minerals, vitamins, will be absorbed in the small intestines. In the jejunum, okay, and also the ileum, I should say, histology of the small intestines we're talking about in general. In those parts of the small intestines, we have waves in the surface of that tube of the intestine called plicae circularis. Okay, it's right in your notes, right at the top there, okay? Plicae circularis. So these would represent the plicae circularis. On the plicae circularis, you have waves again. Let me bring you in closer to this, okay? We have waves again. So here are the actual folds that if you were to open up the intestines, it would look like folds in the intestines. Those folds are the plicae circularis. On those folds, we have little finger-like projections. You could see them with a dissecting microscope. You could see them a little bit with the naked eye. They look like the nap of a carpet, and those are called villi. And once again, that wave-like presentation increasing surface area. If I take one of those villi and we look at it even closer, on top of the cells that are there, we will have microvilli. Microvilli, as seen microscopically, look like little waves again. So we have three wave-like presentations, increasing surface area. So we can really use all this increased surface area to absorb nutrients. Okay? Plicae circularis, villi, microvilli. The largest are plicae circularis. Villi are seen with the naked eye. Microvilli, you need a microscope to see them. Okay? Microvilli is also known as a brush border. So if I were to take one of those, let me draw that a little bit better for you. Okay, my Bart Simpson head. If I were to take one of those simple columnar cells and look at it microscopically, it would have the microvilli on top. But what it really looks like when you're looking at microscopically, it looks like somebody took a paintbrush and just sort of smeared across the top of a cell. That presentation is called a brush border. Some people call it a brush border. So it doesn't look really like fingers projecting up. It looks kind of like a smear going across the top of the cell. Okay. Peyer's patches, the next slide, Peyer's patches. Underneath the mucosa, so if we're looking at this, if this represents the mucosa, underneath it we have what's called the submucosa. In that submucosa, we have aggregates of lymphoid follicles, which are going to be white blood cells. When we look at them microscopically in lab, you'll see them. They're little gatherings of white blood cells that are bluish, purplish staining that are just in the submucosa, and this is going to provide one of those front lines of defense yet again. It's going to provide lymphatic tissue. If we have bacteria or viruses enter our system through our foods, we have this front line of defense called mucosal associated lymphatic tissue, or MALT system, that provides an immediate, quick response to any microorganisms that come into our system. Okay. In the duodenum, this is on the same slide underneath Peyer's patches. In the duodenum, we have glands that are also located in the submucosa. These glands are going to secrete a mucousy substance. And once again, if you think about it, the duodenum is the first part of the small intestine coming off the stomach. So it's going to be very acidic. Substances coming from the stomach to the duodenum are acidic. These mucosal glands that secrete these alkaline substances help to calm down that acidity from the stomach. Okay, they're located in the submucosa of the duodenum. Excuse me. liver and gallbladder. Okay. I am going to actually zoom in on this slide. Okay. This is pictured in your book. I would suggest that you open up to this book so you can look at these different parts as I mentioned them. Okay. So a lot of blood goes through the liver. Now remember we talked about the portal system, hepatic portal system. Hepatic portal system brings blood from the intestines, the small intestines, to the liver to be processed. The small intestines will process all that nutrient-rich blood and then send it to the heart to be pumped out to the body. It can also store substances like amino acids, glucose is glycogen, okay? There are 4 lobes to the liver: right, left, caudate, and quadrate. Caudal usually means towards the bottom, but the caudate lobe is actually towards the top in the middle on that bottom picture, okay? So right and left, and if you're looking at that picture on the screen, the top picture is the liver as it faces you. The bottom picture is the liver as it faces away from you. So you can see all 4 lobes on that picture at the bottom: right, left, caudate, and quadrate, okay? If you look also at the back, you can see the entrance of the hepatic artery, portal vein, and that actually should be duct, hepatic duct. I don't know why I've cut there. So hepatic artery, portal vein, and also hepatic duct, okay, should be coming out at what's called the porta hepatis. So that's a common area those 3 structures come out, okay? The common hepatic duct, well actually let me go over hepatic artery and portal vein first. Portal vein, we know, is going to be the vein bringing nutrient-rich blood from the intestines to the liver, okay? Hepatic artery is the artery that supplies liver tissue itself with blood. Don't forget that the liver tissue needs to live and breathe and excrete waste as well. The hepatic artery does that for the liver, and the hepatic artery will bring fresh blood in, regenerate the tissue. Hepatic vein will take those substances out, okay? The hepatic duct, okay, look at the bottom there, common hepatic duct, is going to be a duct that will leave the liver and it will join with what's called the cystic duct. What happens is the liver creates bile. The gallbladder doesn't create bile. The liver creates bile. The gallbladder actually stores bile, okay? So the liver creates bile. It goes down the common hepatic duct. It joins with the cystic duct. If it's not excreting bile, it will actually send bile back up to the gallbladder to be stored. If you have a fatty meal and you need bile to help emulsify fats, bile will go down through the cystic duct. It'll also go down through the hepatic duct. They will join into the common bile duct and it will dump into that first part of the duodenum that we just went over at that ampulla, hepatopancreatic ampulla that we just spoke about, okay? So that whole system helps to create bile that'll help to emulsify fats in our body, okay? And I'll draw a picture of that for you, but I want to point out one more thing, the falciform ligament and round ligament. If you look at the top picture, the front part of the liver, the falciform ligament runs the full length between the right and left lobe. That's actually like a sheet of tissue that connects onto the anterior body wall, okay? It's been cut, obviously. So this is a cadaver liver. That cadaver liver has been cut out. The falciform ligament has been cut down its entire length so we could get the liver out. In a living specimen, this would actually attach to the anterior chest wall, or abdominal wall, excuse me, and help to hold the liver in place. Now the round ligament, also known as a ligamentum teres, you need to know it just as one, round ligament is fine. The round ligament is vestigial or leftover from the umbilical vein. And the umbilical vein helps us with the embryological blood flow, okay? So that round ligament goes all the way down from the bottom of the liver, you can see right there, goes down to the umbilicus. So obviously it's been cut as well. helps with the embryological blood supply, because don't forget, we need that blood supply to go through the umbilical cord. And we'll go through that whole series of events when we go through embryology. Okay, so the round ligament, once you're born, is immediately cut off blood supply, and it shrinks down to form a ligament that connects from the bottom of your liver down to your belly button. Okay, so falciform ligament is that broad ligament on the front between the right and left lobe. Round ligament is that long ligament that goes from the bottom of the liver down to the belly button. Okay, I would like to just briefly, okay, go over that duct system. I know that's a little bit confusing. Okay. So we've got common bile duct. We've got a great drawing of the liver. Okay, and underneath the liver, we have, is that big enough? Yeah, the gallbladder. Okay, so the liver creates bile. Okay, gallbladder stores it. Liver creates bile, gallbladder stores it. There's a duct that comes from the liver. Let me draw it in different colors. Get fancy on you now. Okay. There's a duct that comes from the gallbladder. Oh, that's not working for me. There we go. Okay. So the duct that comes from the liver is the hepatic duct. Okay. Is the hepatic duct. H-E-P-A-T-I-C, hepatic duct. There's actually branches of that. We're just going to consider it one duct as the hepatic duct. The gallbladder will have the cystic duct. Running out of room. Okay, so cystic duct will come from the gallbladder, hepatic duct will come from the liver. They join together as a common bile duct. That common bile duct then joins up with the pancreatic duct and dumps into the duodenum. Okay? Now, the kind of cool thing about this is obviously we know people who have had their gallbladders taken out. So what happens? Where does that bile go? The duct system will actually expand and create a little outpocketing in which it will store bile. So the bile will still be created in the liver, it'll go down into the duct system, be stored there, and then it can be released down into the duodenum as needed when fatty meals are ingested. Okay, so any questions about that? Shoot me an email. Okay, shoot me an email. Okay, so microscopic anatomy of the liver. There are liver lobules, okay? They're six-sided, and those are full of hepatocytes. Those hepatocytes are going to process all that nutrient-rich blood. They will also create bile. So they have several different processes, but the major processes are going to be to process macronutrients and micronutrients, so carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, vitamins, and minerals, okay? The other major activity is going to be create bile, okay? So we have two major processes happening. The liver also helps to detoxify. So there's a special little subset group of macrophages called Kupffer cells. Those eat up substances that our body wants to get rid of, okay? So you've got these little packets of cells in these liver lobules through which blood can be filtered and bile can be created, okay? It will then filter or send that blood into veins, which will then leave the liver and go to the heart, okay? So you've got these little pockets of cells in these little, let me sort of zoom in here a little bit, okay? You can see that hexangular shape grouping of cells. There's not a cell on the right there. You can see that six-sided structure. Inside that six-sided structure, you have hepatocytes, which are going to be your liver cells. Okay, so within that six-sided structure, there's what? Thousands of cells, okay? That whole six-sided structure is not the cell. The cells are on the inside. Those cells help to filter blood and to create bile. Okay. That central vein in the center, you can see that round open space is going to be the vein that collects that nutrient-rich blood that's been processed and send it back to the inferior vena cava to go back to the heart. Okay, Kupffer cells remove debris and bacteria. Kupffer cells are macrophages. They're macrophages that are specialized for liver use, okay? And they live in with those hepatocytes looking for substances to eat up and destroy. So what does the liver do? Produces bile, we talked about that. Stores glucose as glycogen. Okay, some of us are having a problem remembering this. Glucose is a single shape cell, okay, that will bond with multiple other glucose units. When we get into multiple glucose units, we consider it glycogen. Glycogen is going to be the stored form of glucose in long chains of glucose. We like to store it in the liver and skeletal muscle. Okay, so I would review that once or twice to kind of get it into your noggin. The liver uses amino acids to make proteins. So you go out tonight, you decide you're going to have a hamburger. Okay, you have the hamburger. Obviously, there's a lot of protein in hamburgers. When you ingest that hamburger, you don't turn into a cow. Okay, when you ingest that hamburger, you break down the amino acids that are in that hamburger so your body can take the amino acids it needs, reconfigure them into the proteins that we need to make in our body. Okay. Our liver stores fat-soluble vitamins, which are A, D, E, and K. We're going to talk about those in the next lecture. Okay. And it helps with detoxification. The main cell for that is going to be that Kupffer cell. That Kupffer cell is going to eat up all those organisms that we don't want, process them, and get rid of them. Okay. Liver does a lot. Hepatitis, liver-titis, or itis, I should say, inflammation. Hepatitis is a viral infection. Okay. There are different strains of it. The 4 strains we're going to focus on are A and E, B and C. The reason I group them is because A and E are enteric. What enteric means, here we go with some of our fun micro conversations. The root for enteric is fecal oral, and yes, you get the definition. Fecal oral means that somebody has pooped and not washed their hands appropriately. Somebody else gets to eat their poop. Okay, this is why we wash our hands. A and E are enteric fecal oral route. People ingest the feces either from somebody who hasn't washed their hands or from infected waters. And they get flu-like symptoms. It can affect the liver and cause inflammation, but usually this will remit on its own, okay, after a period of time. It usually doesn't become chronic. I suppose in some cases it can, but usually doesn't. B and C are spread by blood, so this would be spread, and actually A and E can become chronic, but more likely than not, it will actually remit on its own. Okay, B and C are spread by blood. So this could be infected blood, sharing of needles, okay, would be an example of a way that somebody could get this. This can cause cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is going to be what we see on the right here. The picture, the entire picture on the right, I should say. It's broken down into a normal liver on the left and a cirrhotic liver on the right. Chronic inflammation from hepatitis can eventually lead to fatty deposition in that liver, or the deposition of connective tissue that grows and replaces those normal hepatocytes. The response to that can be the damaging of that tissue, which can cause an enlarged tissue that's malformed. Now, there's several problems with this. We just saw everything that the liver does. It can't do those processes that we looked at on the previous slide as well if it's sick. The other thing is we could get something called portal hypertension. If we don't have normal liver cells to process blood that's being sent from the small intestines to the liver will obstruct that blood flow. It'll back up into that portal vein, hepatic portal vein. That'll increase the pressure in that vein, and it causes something called portal hypertension. Okay? Portal hypotension means that the liver is not getting the appropriate blood that it needs to process all those micronutrients, backs up into the portal vein, and it could cause distension of the veins surrounding the belly button. Something called, you don't need to know it, but anybody who's interested, caput medusa, CAPUTMEDUSEA, musa. It looks like distended blood vessels around the belly button because those blood vessels are being enlarged because blood can't get out of the portal vein and into the systemic circulation. So hepatitis can lead to very, very bad things, and cirrhosis is really one of the main things that it can lead to. Now, keep in mind, cirrhosis can also be caused by other things such as alcoholism, some medications, excessive use of fat-soluble vitamins. I mean, excessive use, okay? So cirrhosis can be caused by other things, but hepatitis is one of the main culprits for it, okay? Bile, yellow-green substance that is alkaline, okay? It consists mostly of bile salts and water. Now, the bile salts are going to be the main thing on that list, which are going to help to emulsify fats. Bile salts are going to have a hydrophobic and a hydrophilic portion, okay? It'll surround fats with the hydrophobic portion. The hydrophilic portion will go on the outside, and it creates a nice little bubble around fat so we can transport fats through the blood, I'm sorry. If you think of it, once again, if you pour water and fat together, water and oil, for example, it will separate. So if we were to put fat into our bloodstream without emulsifying it, without surrounding it by a structure that creates a hydrophilic portion, okay? Hydrophilic means water-loving, okay? It'll spread that fat throughout the blood. Without that emulsification, the fat would separate out, okay? Bile, we tend to reabsorb, oh, I forget the exact numbers. It's in the high 90s. It might be 99%. We recycle 99% of the bile salts that are created in the body. So what happens is it goes into the duodenum from that hepatopancreatic ampulla, okay? So bile goes into the duodenum, goes through the intestines all the way down to the ileum. It's reabsorbed by the veins, inferior mesenteric, I wasn't going to say that, but inferior mesenteric veins. It's reabsorbed, okay? Actually, I'm sorry, superior mesenteric veins. Let's just say it's reabsorbed. Okay, it's reabsorbed by the ileum or at the ileum and returned back to the liver by the hepatic portal blood, okay? Then it's resecreted. So it's reused. We only get rid of about 1%, okay, at a time. Gallbladder. Gallbladder is a nice green muscular sac under the liver. If you were to open up the abdomen of a cat or a human, you would see that green substance or those bile salts sort of sneak out and create like a greenish tint around the liver. Gallbladder doesn't create bile, it stores it and concentrates it, okay? There's a hormone called CCK or cholecystokinin that's released when we get a meal. It's released by the duodenum and it stimulates the gallbladder to contract. It also stimulates the pancreas to release digestive enzymes. So cholecystokinin from the duodenum is going to stimulate the release of substances which will break down foodstuffs when we eat a meal. And it's starting to go through our GI tract. Gallstones. Okay, this may not be a great picture in your book, but I know that you could see it on this screen probably pretty well. Also known as biliary caliculi. This is cholesterol. Don't forget bile salts is part cholesterol. The cholesterol in it can actually crystallize, causes agonizing pain if people have a flare-up, okay? You can have a small one, you could have several gallstones. They can take this out endoscopically now fairly easily. They're using ultrasound waves to break them up. I think that's another tactic they're using. Okay, so there's different ways that you could take care of this. This is very painful. People who have the surgery tend to really like it because the thing about the gallstone, about the attacks, is it can happen anywhere, anytime, and it's really, really, really very painful. Okay, so generally people like to get this treated. Pancreas. Head of the pancreas sits in the lap of the duodenum. Okay, pancreas is retroperitoneal. Don't forget that little saying. Kidneys ascend and descend down the pike. We already went over this. It secretes exocrine and endocrine substances. So the two sections are exocrine, or what are called the acini. These acini are clusters of cells. These clusters of cells will secrete pancreatic juice, indeed, but pancreatic juice has digestive enzymes. Those digestive enzymes will break down carbs and lipids and proteins. Okay, so that is the exocrine portion. It secretes to that duct, which goes to the duodenum. The islets of Langerhans are going to be the endocrine portion. We talked about this in endocrine. So the islets of Langerhans secrete insulin and glucagon. Insulin will put glucose into cells. Glucagon will release stored forms of sugar or glucose when our blood sugar is low. Okay, so insulin puts sugar into cells. Glucagon will release stored forms of sugar. Main pancreatic duct combines with that bile duct as it enters the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Okay, we already went over that. Large intestines. You can see there's ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid, and rectum. It absorbs water, secretes feces. Okay, I'm actually going to zoom out here. Okay. And go over some of these structures. So the Taenia coli, if you look at this picture closely in your book, you can see that there are long lines that run the length of the large intestines. Those are the Taenia coli. They're long lengths. There's actually 3 of them around the large intestines. That wasn't 3. 3, okay, of smooth muscle that run the length of the large intestines. Okay. The pockets, you can see that there are little pockets or pouches. Those are the haustra. Okay, so the Taenia coli are the long lines of smooth muscle. The pockets are the haustra of the large intestines. The epiploic appendages are little outpocketings of fat. And if you look at this in your book, there's a couple right on the top. So epiploic appendages are the fat that stick off. The cecum, so starting at the very beginning, this little pocket here is the ileum, okay? This outpocketing here, this rounded portion is the cecum. That's why the valve between them is called ileocecal valve, okay? We have the ascending colon. This bend is called the hepatic, because it's near the liver, flexure, because it's a bend. Hepatic flexure, transverse colon, splenic flexure is the bend near the spleen, descending colon, sigmoid is the S shape, rectum is the first part as it leads down of the straight part as it leads down to the anus. Okay, the anus is like the last inch to 2 inches. Okay, so that's the full length of the different anatomy of the large intestine. There's a transverse and a sigmoid mesocolon. What that means is that's those serous membranes that encase the transverse colon and attaches to the posterior wall. Okay, so the transverse colon and the sigmoid colon have mesocolons which help to hold them back in place against the abdominal wall, just like we talked about with the serous membranes previously. There's an internal and external anal sphincter. The internal is smooth muscle, the external is skeletal. The skeletal muscle gives us the ability, thank God, to decide when we can expel feces. Okay. Microscopic anatomy. There's a lot of goblet cells. We looked at these in lab. If you haven't, we will soon. Those goblet cells are small cells which will secrete mucus. It'll help to facilitate the passage of feces. There's also bacterial flora. Okay, flora are bacteria that are normal to our bodies that help to live in the colon, which will help to break down substances in the colon, synthesize vitamin B and K in the colon, and it helps to also break down feces as well, or make feces. The thing about flora, about bacteria, is they need to stay in specific areas of the body. Okay, so the flora that's in the GI tract needs to stay there. In a female, the flora in the vagina needs to stay there. If that spreads, say example, to the urethra, and the urethra should be sterile, then we can spread infection, or we can create infection because we're introducing bacteria that's foreign to that area. Okay, so there's a lot of bacterial flora in feces. Okay, 400, 500 different types. Okay. Motility of the large intestine. Those haustra, those outpocketings actually can create contractions. There are major contractions 3 to 4 times a day, which will actually sweep out the colon. And this is when we expel feces. Okay, these major contractions will actually sweep out the length of the large intestine. And the whole purpose of that is to get rid of waste, indeed, but also to create more room for new food. We have what's called gastroileal and gastrocolic reflexes. So when we have food come into our stomach, it will cause the colon and the ileum to push foodstuffs out. That's why quite often, as much as we don't like to talk about it, when we eat, after we eat, we have to go to the bathroom. Because of these reflexes, food coming into the stomach tells the ileum and the colon time to clear out, create more room, and that's when we expel feces. Excuse me. Okay. Diverticulosis. Okay, diverticulitis, I should say. So, what diverticula are? I'm going to zoom in here. If we erase this, first of all, along the length of the large intestine, okay, just to do it real quick, we can get little outpocketings of the walls. So the walls can get weak in certain areas, and we can have a little outpocketing of those walls. Okay. That outpocketing is called a diverticula. The condition of having that outpocketing is diverticulosis. That's right in the notes. Okay, so diverticula is the outpocketing. The condition of having this is called diverticulosis. If a person with diverticulosis eats seeds, seeds from tomatoes, seeds from cucumbers, they can get stuck in these little outpocketings. If it gets stuck in that little outpocketing, it could cause inflammation. That inflammation is called diverticulitis. Itis, once again, referencing as a suffix, inflammation. So diverticula is outpocketing, diverticulosis is a condition, diverticulitis is an inflammation of the diverticula. Okay. Love talking about diarrhea. Okay, diarrhea is going to be the rushing of foodstuffs through the colon. The reason that happens is because our body senses there is something infectious. It's trying to get rid of it. If we move foodstuffs through the colon, which is the primary area that we reabsorb water, we're going to expel that water, creating diarrhea. In the opposite direction, if we don't move foodstuffs through the colon quickly enough, it reabsorbs all of that water. There's very little water in there, and we get what's called constipation. Okay, so appendicitis. So if the area where the ileum comes into the large intestine, we have this little pocket called the cecum. Okay, hanging off the cecum, we have a little, it's called a vermiform appendix. Vermiform references a worm. So it looks like a little worm. It could be anywhere from the tip of your finger to, I've seen them in cadavers, the length of the finger. It's your appendix. Okay, the appendix has some sort of lymphoid tissue, provides some sort of immunity. Not a real strong amount, though. That's why people can have this taken out and not have a problem. Clinically speaking, as feces passes through, or the beginning of feces passes through this area, some of it can block this opening. So the appendix has an opening going into the cecum. Feces can block it. If it gets blocked, it can get infected, excuse me. If it gets infected, you could get appendicitis. Okay, so appendicitis is going to be an inflammation of the appendix. It's so teeny tiny. When it starts to get inflamed and infected, it can grow and eventually can burst. If it bursts, it's very bad because it releases feces and infectious agents into the abdominal peritoneal cavity. And you can get a very bad peritonitis. Okay? So, with appendicitis, quite often, it can begin as sort of diffuse abdominal peri-umbilical, peri meaning around umbilicus pain. And it can centralize, or I shouldn't say centralize, localize down to the right lower quadrant where the appendix is. So sometimes people don't get it at first because it's abdominal pain. But if you have a patient who has abdominal pain, excuse me, peri-umbilical pain that's pretty pronounced, they should be tested for appendicitis. It may just stay there, or it can move down to the right lower quadrant. Okay, so peri-umbilical pain leading to right lower abdominal quadrant where the appendix actually is. Appendicitis. Okay, physiology of chemical absorption and digestion. Let me see. I'm going to zoom in on the PowerPoint now. Okay, so carbohydrates are primarily called amylases. They're in the mouth. That should be pancreas without an E. I have no idea why the spell check made it that way. So amylases are going to be enzymes that break down carbohydrates. They're found in the mouth and the pancreas. Okay, salivary amylase, pancreatic amylase. They're going to break down those different types of carbs we're going to talk about next lecture. Now, there's also a substance released in the intestines. So this is in the intestines called lactase. Lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. People that are lactose intolerant can't break down lactose, okay? So they tend to not be able to absorb the lactose, sugar. It stays in the intestine. It creates gas, and it tends to create diarrhea as well, okay? So that's an inherent condition. So people that have that condition can either take supplements or they have to limit their intake of milk products. Proteins are broken down by amino acids from pepsin from the stomach's chief cells, okay? There's also chymotrypsin in the pancreas, which is going to break down proteins as well. For our purposes in this class, we'll just stick with pepsin from the stomach. Lipids are going to be emulsified with those bile salts. They're broken down into fatty acids by lipases, okay? Once again, pancreas without the E. And nucleic acids are actually broken down by enzymes as well, so we can reconfigure them into nucleic acids that we need for our DNA and our RNA. So primarily they're going to end in ASEs. A lot of them you can find out or figure out from the suffix and the prefix. And they'll be primarily released from the pancreas, bile salts from the gallbladder, okay, and then that pepsin from the stomach. Absorption, mostly small intestine. We've talked about all this. Ileum is going to reclaim bile salts, carbs, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids are going to be absorbed in the small intestine. Lipids will be absorbed into the hepatic portal circulation through the blood, but we can also create little structures called chylomicrons. These chylomicrons will be little groupings of fat with proteins that will be created and released into the lymphatic system. Okay, I'm not going to test you about it. If you're wondering about it, that's why I'm just briefly going over it. Okay, so these are going to be little groupings of fat that'll be released into the lymphatic system and then eventually dumped into the bloodstream. So it bypasses the liver, these chylomicrons. Malabsorption of nutrients, there are varied causes, but one biggie is going to be celiac disease. People with celiac disease are basically allergic to gluten, and that gluten will destroy the villi in the small intestines, those little finger-like projections in the microvilli. So if it damages the villi and the microvilli, they won't be able to absorb nutrients as well as they should, because those structures help to absorb nutrients. You're destroying half of the structures in the intestines that absorb nutrients. Those people then have diarrhea, pain, and malnutrition. Okay, celiac disease, kind of a nasty little thing. People have to totally be off of gluten in order to be able to reabsorb substances. And once they do get off gluten, they develop those villi and microvilli, and they're able to absorb substances well again. Okay. Endoderm, those 3 layers, endo, meso, and ectoderm. If you don't remember them, please look it up, because I've talked about it about 10 times. Okay. The endoderm forms a primitive gut. Okay. Some of the things that can happen: cleft palate. This is so sad. Cleft palate. Smile Train is one of the big proponents for fundraising for surgery for people with cleft palate. Cleft palate, if you've ever seen those pictures in a magazine, it's just heartbreaking. Cleft palate is non-fusion of the palatine bones or the palatine process of the maxilla. The hard palate, it's non-fusion of the hard palate. It can be small, it can be pretty major, and it can make an opening up into the nasal cavity, so they have difficulty eating food. Okay, so cleft palate, varying degrees of it. Cystic fibrosis. So these are both congenital. These are things that people are born with, is what congenital means. Cystic fibrosis primarily affects the lungs. It can also affect the pancreas. Huge amounts of mucus are created with people with cystic fibrosis. It can clog up the lungs and cause difficulty with breathing, but it can also block the duct of the pancreatic gland, okay? So when it blocks the duct, we can't get those digestive enzymes going into the duodenum. So not only do they have difficulty breathing, they have difficulty with malabsorption. They can't absorb carbs, lipids, proteins into their system. Rooting reflex is such a cool little reflex that infants have. I'm sure if you've ever held an infant, it totally makes sense. If you stroke their cheek, they'll open their mouth and turn their head towards you looking for food, for the nipple, okay? During old age, digestive juices are slowed. We can't absorb nutrients as well as we used to, unfortunately. Okay, that is it for this lecture, okay? I'm going to fire up metabolism next, and don't forget the first 2 parts of digestive as well. Okay, thanks a bunch. Take care.